Hello there. Welcome to the part 2 of our control structures topic in Java. In this video, we will discuss about the different repetition structures and how to use them. Okay, so let's start. In Java, we have what we call a repetition structure, or can be called simply as loops. Loops are used to repeat the same code or block of code multiple times. The number of repetition is based on the criteria that is defined in the loop structure, usually a Boolean expression, or an expression that has a true or false as a result. Okay, so let's create an example. Let's use the while loop first. Okay. So the structure of a while loop is typing like this. So we have a keyword while, and then the open and close parenthesis, where we can put the expression that will result in a Boolean value, either true or false, and the body of the while. So it is delimited by open and close curly braces, and this body will be executed multiple times as long as the expression part remains true. So what does it mean? So let's create an example. So let's say we have a variable counter which is equals to 0, and on counter we state what would be the condition as for this looping. So while counter is less than or equal to 10, okay, then execute the body of the while. So print line, so the value is plus counter, and then counter is equals to counter plus 1. Okay, so we don't use yet the input. Okay, so let's try to run this. Okay, so the output is we have multiple prints of the value is and the current value of the counter. So what does it mean is that since we initialize a counter in 0 and then compare it using the equality operator less than or equal sign, so it's like asking a question. Is counter less than or equal to 10? So since counter is initially 0, this is true because counter is less than 10. So since it's true, the looping will proceed in the body of the while and execute the code, whatever code you have put it here, as long as it is in the body or inside the open and close curly braces. So the first one is we printed the value is and the current value of the counter, and then we incremented the counter by 1. So why do we need to do this? So we need to increment the value so that we need to approach the termination of the code. So if the counter is becomes 11, this will result into false and the looping will stop. So if we forgot or we didn't have any incrementation for the counter and there's no way for the condition to be false, we have an issue of infinite loop. So let's try. So I commented the counter by incrementing by 1. So let's look what will happen. Okay, so as you can see, it prints a lot of the value is, but the value of counter is always a 0, and it is always true for the condition part of the while. So this is an infinite loop. So remember always that if you are using a looping that based on a counter, you need to have a incrementation or decrementation, depends upon the types of looping that you want. So if you have an incrementation like this one, so it will eventually stop since the condition will be result into false. So if you want to reverse it, let's say you want to start from 10 down to 0, you need to set the counter to 10 and change the condition. So let's use another equality operator. So while counter is greater than or equals to 0, then print the value, and then this time we don't need to add, we need to subtract the value so that it will eventually be negative value, so this will become false. So let's try. Okay, so the value is from 10 to 0. Okay, so our example here is what we call a counter-controlled repetition, because the variable counter is the one who controls the execution of the while loop. So but what if we have a scenario where we don't know yet how many times the looping will gonna execute its body? So let's clear this first and create an example. So let's say we create a username and password validation program. So we have a variable username and password. So let's fix first the values of these variables, and then we have a variable uname and a variable pwd to receive the input of the user. Then we have a prompt to enter the username. So enter your username. Okay, then the uname will receive the value. So input that next line. Okay, then the same for the password. So enter your password. Okay, then receive the value. Okay, so now we can decide whether we need to print the invalid accounts, try again, or the authorized message. So we can use the while loop to do that. So let's create the condition part. Okay, so while here's the body. In the condition, we can compare the username and or against the contents of the uname using the equals method. So here's the equals, and now put the uname or user password that equals pwd. So it basically means that either username is equals to uname or the user password is equals to pwd. Okay, will result to either true. But let's reverse the meaning of that. So let's put a not operator, the exclamation point. So let's put the not here and not here. So now it means that if username is not equals to uname or the user password is not equals to pwd, then continue the loop. Now if this is true or will result in true, let's print a message, invalid accounts, try again. So try again means the user needs to enter again the username and password. So let's copy this code and put it in the body of the while. Okay, so here's the whole while. But if the condition now becomes false, it means that the username now equals to uname and the user password is equals to pwd. Let's output the message authorized. Okay, let's try this example. Okay, so let's try incorrect username first. So let's say here password. Okay, invalid accounts, try again. So let's say we have a correct username but incorrect password, let's say lowercase p. Okay, invalid accounts again. So let's say username is incorrect but the password is correct. It will, okay, valid accounts again. But if we enter the correct username and the password, So it is now authorized. Okay, so that is the while loop. Now let's explore another repetition structure, which is the do while. Okay, so let's clear this first. Okay, so the do while is basically the same as while, but a very distinct difference. So the syntax for do while is writing first the keyword do, then the body, open and close curly brace, then the while keyword, then your condition. Okay, so as you can see, the while is in the bottom of the code, and it has a semicolon, while the while loop doesn't have any semicolon in the closing curly brace of its body. So what does it mean? It means that the do while loop will guaranteed it will execute the body at least once before checking the condition if it is true or false. So let's try. So let's say let's go back to the counter controlled repetition. So while counter is less than or equals to 10, then let's print the counter, the value of counter. The value is counter, then increment. So for the incrementation, we can use the shorthand notation using the plus plus. So the plus plus is basically the same as counter is equals to counter plus 1. Because we are incrementing by 1, we can shortcut this code into this using just the plus plus. So plus plus always increment by 1. Or if you want to decrement, we can use the minus minus to decrement the counter by 1. Okay, so let's try this first. Let's run. Okay, so the output is the same as our example previously in the while. So the value is from 0 to 10. But what if the counter has a value of, let's say, 25? So the counter is greater than 10. So the while loop, or the while, checking the condition will result into false. But as I said, the do while loop will execute the body as is, or guaranteed as it will execute at least one. So whatever the condition, either it is true or false. So but if you are using the while loop is checking the condition first before executing the body. So let's compare the while and do while. The value is plus counter. So let's add some markings. This is the while part, and this is the do while. Okay, then counter plus plus. So if we run this, okay, so the do while version does have print the value of is 25, because the checking of condition is later below in the code, while the while loop it will initially check the condition if it is true or false before proceeding to execute the body. So the counter is greater than 10, so it is false, so it doesn't print or it doesn't execute the body, while the do while loop it print first before checking the condition. So you can interchangeably use the do while and the while, as long as you can remember that these differences between them. So that is the while and do while. Now let's go on for the for loop. Okay, so let's clear this first. So the syntax for loop is writing first the keyword for, then the open open and close curly braces for the body, and the open and close parenthesis for its header. Now the header is very complex. It looks something like this. So if for int x is equal to 0, or let's use the familiar counter. For int counter is equal to 0, counter is less than or equal to 10, counter plus plus. So in the header, we have different parts. We have the declaration, okay, then separated by semicolon, then the condition part, okay, then the incrementation or decrementation. Okay. So here, so the for loop compacts the all of the parts of the looping. So if we compare it in the while loop structure is very similar to that, but they have different parts. So the declaration part is in the upper or in the outside of the while loop. So we have this while counter in counter is equal to 10, then while counter is less than or equal to 10, then counter plus plus. Compares to for loop, they are all declared in the header part. So it is very compact, unlike the while and the do while. So for the for loop, you can focus now on the what you are going to do inside the body. So the same, let's print the same message. The value is counter. So we don't need to put the counter plus plus because we have already an incrementation in the header part of the for loop. So if we run this, it is basically the same. So that is. So now the question is, when are you going to use the for loop and the do while loop and the while loop? So now for me, it doesn't matter whether you use the while, the do while loop, and the for loop, as long as you remember the proper syntax of how to use them. So for the scenarios where I am using a counter variable or a counter controlled repetition, I always use the for loop because I don't need to remember what would be the structure. So the basic structure will be this one, the declaration, condition, incrementation. So because if I am using the while loop, most of the time I forgot the incrementation or the decrementation, and it causes me to have an infinite loop. In for loop, you can also create an infinite loop using a structure like this. So as you can see, it is just the keyword for, then the open and close parenthesis, and the double semicolon, the semicolon of this one and this one. So it means that you didn't put any declaration and specify a condition and the incrementation or decrementation part. So this will result into an infinite loop. So let's try. So print line help. Okay. So if we run this, okay, so that is what happened in the infinite loop because of this for loop. Now, what are the other application for our loopings? Let's say you want to draw a square using the looping. Actually, you can use the print line, okay, but it's very tedious because you need to copy paste. Let's say 5 by 5 square or 5 by 5 asterisk. Okay, so that's it. But we can accomplish this using the for loop, or any loop for that matter. So let's say we have a width is equals to 0, width is less than 5, width plus plus. Okay, now since drawing an asterisk will result into if it reaches the 5, it needs to print the next asterisk in the next line. So how are we going to do that? We can use the nested for loops. It means that we need to add another looping inside the another looping. So let's say this is the height. Okay, then height is less than 5, then height plus plus. Then print the asterisk without the new line. The new line will be printed once the height reaches the 5. Okay, so is this correct, or okay, so maybe we need to revise this. This is the width and this is the height, or the h variable and the w variable. So let's run this. Okay, so here's the output. So we printed first the when we loop this code, or when we run this code, it prints first the first row, and then it enters this for loop, and then it will print 5 times the asterisk. Okay, then once it printed the 5 asterisks, it will stop and then print the new line for the preparation for the next row, then go back again to the for loop, and then enter again the inner for loop, and then print again the next set of asterisks in the next row, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is how we're going to use the nested for loop. So what about let's say you want to draw a right triangle. So what is a right triangle? So I can do this by using again the nested for loop, but we need to change a condition. So now the width will depend on the height, not on the 5. So let's change the 5 into h, and then run the program. Okay, so we have this code, but as you can see, it's just 4 rows. What if we want to print the 5? So we can change the condition to equals and equals. No, this one only. Less than or equal to height. Okay, so we have a right triangle using the for loop, the nested for loop. Okay, so these are the repetition structures in Java: the while, the do while, and the for loop. We just covered the very basic usage of these loops. Later in this tutorial, we will combine selection structure with repetition structure to handle complex logic and executions in our program. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to comment it below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date on these tutorials. See ya!